Hi, Mickey.
Hi, Bob. I think we're running.
That was a pretty reluctant greeting.
Well,
something eating you, man?
My numbers didn't start turning over on my web counter, but now they have started. So.
Okay.
So
how you doing?
I'm doing okay. We had a bad air day yesterday, but it's better today. As you know, I'm very sensitive to air. We had some fires. We had a Santa Ana wind.
Mm-hmm.
Trouble. Crazy weather.
Oh, look at it this way. It could be worse. You could be... fill in the blank.
Barack Obama.
You got it.
Well, interesting. We both just saw most of his latest attempt to distance himself from Reverend Wright, who...
His denunciation, but not renunciation of Reverend Wright.
Is that what... Really? Is that what he said?
Well, I mean, he didn't disown him or renounce him, and in fact, after Fox aired it, the Fox broadcasters immediately started complaining that he hadn't, really renounced and disowned him. But it seemed like a pretty thorough distancing to me. This, of course, comes in the wake of the comments that Wright made on his little speaking tour at the National Press Club and elsewhere.
Well, in many ways, Wright. Everybody say, "Well, Wright's a crazy man on the loose. He's sabotaging Obama's campaign." But he presented Obama with an opportunity, to disown him and distance himself and get him out of the way, and B, he just seemed like a crazy old guy running around. It was clear he wasn't Barack Obama. The crazier he is, the more it's clear that Obama isn't him and doesn't agree with him.
That's funny. I had that, what I thought was iconoclastic take, even before Obama did the further distancing of himself today, because because everybody was reporting the story, even yesterday, Monday, they were saying, Reverend Wright's comments clearly hurt Barack Obama, and I thought, that's a good, from Obama's point of view, that's a good way to spin the story, because it tends to disassociate him from the Reverend Wright, which is what you're saying, right?
Yes, although I don't think Obama completely capitalized on it today, because he's too damn cool. I mean, his whole thing is he doesn't really get angry. Maybe he's worried about stereotypes of angry black men. I don't know. But that's clearly his thing, is he's a cool customer. Even when he's denouncing and rejecting you, he doesn't raise his voice. Even when he says you've insulted him, he doesn't raise his voice. But people, A, want to see some anger, and B, his coolness reinforces the sense that we don't really know who he is. Where's the real man in all this coolness? He says that Reverend Wright didn't really know him, if Reverend Wright says those things about him. Well, if his own Reverend doesn't really know him, this guy, we're voters, we're just meeting him. We don't know him either. Show us some anger.
I thought he came across pretty well, and there were actually two segments. There was the prepared remarks segment, and then there was some impromptu stuff. And in the impromptu stuff, and that was when he said, what happened yesterday was just rants that are not grounded in truth. I thought, did you see that part? I thought that sounded, it wasn't so much that he sounded angry, he sounded genuinely anguished and just genuine, because he was kind of reaching for the words. He clearly wasn't speaking from a prepared text. And I thought in that part especially, he came across quite well.
He comes across very well. I mean, there's no question that you like, if you see, what he said today, you like him better as a person and a politician. But he's running for president, and people need some leadership. And his idea of leadership is you explain everything to everybody, and you're this sort of namby-pamby sort of, I don't know what's the word,
well, he didn't seem namby. He didn't seem namby-pamby today, because he clearly confronted Wright. And in fact, one downside is that presumably Wright is going to say something in reply, and it's going to keep the game alive.
Well, but that might, the angrier Wright gets, unless he has the goods on Obama, the better it might be.
That's what I wondered, is does he have goods? I mean, could he say, I know damn well he was in the pews the day I said,
well,
whatever.
Maybe he could. And as you know, my line is the very first sermon that's recounted in Obama's book is objectionable. So,
Right, you've made that point more than once on your blog,
okay,
kausfiles.
Well, there you go. Well, I've lost my thought. But
sorry, I didn't mean to unsettle you with that remark.
Oh, I know what my thought was. You laughed last week when I said that somehow Obama was hemmed in his ability to distance himself from Wright in a way that he wouldn't be hemmed in the general. But it's clear now that this alleged great race speech he gave in Philadelphia a few weeks ago didn't do the job. And the reason it didn't do the job is because it was all geared toward not offending his black constituency when he separated himself from Wright. I have a friend who's an expert on black-Jewish relations who said, look, he couldn't distance himself more. He was that close to alienating his base as it was, distancing himself as it was, so he was clearly constrained in that speech. And he just spends way too much time, being bound by his black base. And
Mickey, he's got to win the nomination before he runs in the general, and that's something that is obviously not guaranteed at this point, although I still think he's a pretty strong favorite when you look at the actual numbers. But, and actually the speech did do the job, I think, if Wright had just shut up after that. And I'm not so surprised he didn't. I mean, basically, there's a good column by Bob Herbert kind of laying out Wright's psychology, and certainly not defending him, but laying it out. And, Wright has made the decision to use this as a publicity platform rather than serve the interests of Barack Obama. He made the judgment that his career is more important than Barack Obama's. Well, most people feel their careers are more important than other people's careers. So in that sense, it's not shocking.
Well, when the other person's running for president, it's pretty
well,
obtuse.
It's easy for us to say that, but, this is like, here's a guy who was headed into retirement, and he sees this as his opportunity to gain a larger audience than he's ever had before. I'm not sure how many people could easily resist this. Now, you could argue with the audience he's chosen to target, but I don't think it's clear that if he had really played ball with Obama, the clearly good thing to do for Obama would have been during the Moyers interview Friday night, say something that involves the words "I'm sorry." If I had known my remarks were going to be taken out of context, I would have been more careful, and I'm sorry if I've given Americans the wrong blah, blah, blah.
But they obviously weren't taken out of context. He repeated them all yesterday.
Well, anyway, Mickey, my point is just, I know, that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying, Mickey.
Okay.
I'm saying if he had chosen, rather than repeat them, to try to serve Obama's interests, he probably, the way things are, could not have sustained any more time in the spotlight. He would have just faded away. So it was, if his goal is to expand his audience, he may have made the right decision, which is kind of the Al Sharpton decision, which is they only pay attention to me when I make trouble, basically.
Yeah. So he probably, if he looks at it from that narrow perspective, he probably served his interests well, and maybe he'll get a book deal out of it. But I do think it presented Obama with a great opportunity, and I just don't think this statement today, intelligent.
What did you want him to do? What did you want him to do today?
Get angry. On Crossfire, there's a bug in your ear, and there's a producer saying, "Get mad, get mad." Somebody should have told him to get mad. He should show some genuine emotion. Arnold Schwarzenegger was governor of California because at a crucial point in the debate, he showed emotion and put somebody down forcefully.
That's a debate. There's a kind of anger you can show in a dialogue, such as the kind we're having, that looks crazy if you're sitting there alone delivering a statement. What he conveyed was genuine exasperation, and I think that's all you are smart to convey in a setting like that. Personally,
we don't want an exasperated president. We want a forceful leader.
You want an angry president? Well, vote McCain, buddy.
Well, that's. I'm afraid a decision that many people are going to make, Bob.
Well, they may well, but it also shows the perils of an angry president. And the fact is, if you've seen clips when he looks truly angry, they do not make you more likely to vote for him.
Why does it show the perils of an angry president? It shows that somebody who shows anger when it's justified gets votes. That's a good thing.
His true anger clips aren't going to. A lot of them aren't going to help him. He looks like a crazy man when he's on the airplane screaming at a New York Times reporter.
It doesn't. I don't think he looked crazy. It doesn't. I mean, I accept the fact that sometimes he does, but I didn't think those clips look crazy. It doesn't mean just because if Obama got angry, that doesn't mean he's going to invade Iran, Bob. He could be angry. He's just too cool.
No, I don't think he is too cool. I also think you're ignoring, I mean, you alluded to this, but I think he has a racial issue to deal with. As I've said before, if a black man is going to be elected president, he's going to have to be that nice young black man, or that nice middle-aged black man, or something. I think there's a special danger he faces in terms of perception when he becomes angry. That's my view. But you know who I think deserves a commendation, Mickey?
No, I don't.
Hillary Clinton. You know why?
I don't know why.
Okay, well, here's a little news story I saw today about something she said yesterday. It says she focused her criticism over Wright on presumptive GOP nominee Senator John McCain for failing to do more to prevent state Republican parties from running an ad attacking Obama over comments made by his former minister. And then there's a quote from her. I regret the efforts by the Republicans to politicize this matter, and I believe that if Senator McCain were serious, he would do more than just send a letter. Now, Mickey, I think the fact that she can adopt the perspective of her rival, Barack Obama, just speaks volumes about her capacity for empathy. What do you think?
You're obviously being ironic. She's having it both ways there. It does.
There's a serious question, though. Does anybody take that seriously? What is her calculation? Does she think anyone will read this and think, oh, yeah, I mean...
The problem with those ads is that they're devastating. If you see that ad...
I haven't seen the North Carolina ad.
It's highly effective. He sat in the pews while this guy said, goddamn America. And he said it again yesterday. It's hard to argue that Obama should have stayed in that church. Given what,
but we don't know that he was in the. We don't know that he was in the pews when he actually said that, do we?
No, but he obviously knows that he says those things, and it's obviously pretty close to who he is since he repeated it unbidden yesterday.
Yeah.
But the ad was devastating before it. It's just the visual of this crazy man and its association with Obama is it's all guilt by association, but it's, I think, legitimate guilt by association, and it's very effective.
I don't think it is, but anyway, we've probably had that argument.
I think Obama is legitimate and Ayers isn't. I don't think he's that close to Ayers, even though...
Yeah, well, the Ayers thing is ridiculous. I mean, if anybody's ever served on a board of anything... I mean, there are two things. He served on the board with Ayers, and then... Ayers had a fundraiser for him at his house. Are those the two items? I mean, how many...
If you read Tom McGuire, he's the expert on it. There's a little more than that. He's enmeshed with the whole Ayers family, apparently. But
but Bill's the only one who's bad news anyway.
Ayers' educational theories, there was a piece by Saul Stern in Manhattan Institute, are not exactly what America needs either. So
right, but that's an absurd thing to get into. I mean... I have a lot of friends whose theories aren't what America most needs, but I'm not going to denounce them.
It would be one thing if he was serving on an education board doing really good work to help children and failed to denounce Ayers because he was an unrepentant terrorist. It's another thing if Ayers is spouting bogus left-wing jargon that's hurting America's children and Obama still doesn't associate with him. Doesn't disassociate himself.
Yeah, I just find the whole thing sickening, and it's... And I guess Obama's position is, it's like there are various people that the Clintons have associated with that you could, probably, raise a little bit of a kerfuffle about. But Obama's not in a position to do it, kind of, right?
Yeah. Why is it sickening? What's sickening? It's sickening that he associated with
I think guilt by association is a sickening game.
You're constantly playing guilt by association with
me. You mean what? You mean you and Ann Coulter?
Yeah, you're constantly saying, "Oh, Mickey, you associate with Ann Coulter, you're guilty."
Well, no, I think someone
that sickens me, Bob.
What?
That sickens me.
Well, no, I've made the rules clear. I think that someone who uses racial slurs and ethnic slurs to refer to an ethnic group is someone you should not associate with.
What about white folks' greed? That seems like an ethnic slur to me.
What about what?
Reverend Wright denouncing white folks' greed in the very first sermon that Obama heard, the one that made him join the church. White folks greed. That doesn't seem like a positive thing to say about white folks.
Well, he's not associating with him now. But the fact is, look, there's an asymmetry in these rules, and you know that very well.
A weak answer, yeah.
In fact, one of these...
What's the asymmetry?
Well, in the rules between what you can say about whites and what you can say about blacks, there are all kinds of asymmetries in the rules based on which is the privileged group and which is not. You can criticize white people, or males and females. You can say, there's any number of sentences you can begin with, the trouble with men is, and it's a little dicier, at least certainly in liberal circles, to begin with the trouble with women is. And that's fine. I mean...
You mean that in your PC academic world, it's okay to do that? I'm saying, do you endorse this double standard?
Actually, I think it has a certain logic that historically aggrieved and disempowered groups get a little more protection on the taboo front than historically empowered and privileged groups. Yeah, I actually kind of see that. Yeah.
But your sweeping thing that you have to disassociate from yourself from anyone who uses an ethnic slur has been badly compromised by this principle, which is as long as it's not an ethnic slur against whites.
Yeah, I guess I would say two things. One is I might amend that by reference to the asymmetry, and so if Ann Coulter had been talking about white people, it might have been a little bit of a different matter. The other thing is, what
was the great ethnic slur she used? That ragheads.
It was ragheads to refer to Muslims.
Yeah, well, okay.
And which leads to the other thing I take into consideration is just as a practical matter, how explosive, how incendiary is the slur? Well, it doesn't get much worse than using an ethnic slur against Muslims at this point in history. Doesn't get much worse than that.
Well, that's a highly principled stand.
Well, look, I'm a consequentialist. Okay.
Okay.
So it is within my worldview.
Yeah. So you can practice guilt by association when you want, but the right wingers can't say, Obama, you're associating with Bill Ayers.
Mickey, that response is really not worthy of you. I'm sorry. I just laid out the rules, and it isn't when Bob says it's okay. When other people don't, it's not. It's a little more subtle than that, and I think you kind of know it, right?
I know, but I was looking for a way to end the conversation.
Oh, you did it.
Okay.
But wait, but what about the chances that the candidates face at this point? I mean, the betting markets as of the end of last night still had Hillary right around 20%. I've got to think that at the end of today they'll be higher.
Higher?
Not that that's right, actually.
No, I think Obama helped himself today. Don't you think, in general? Yesterday was a bad day. Today was an okay day.
Yeah, but sometimes there's a lag in these things.
Well, and people in North Carolina aren't getting the full CNN effect. They're getting a distilled CNN effect. The polls show Hillary gaining in North Carolina.
I know, quite a bit.
It's under 10 points. If she wins North Carolina, I don't know what the hell happens. It's a
her odds go way up. I think that's a bit much.
But it's not a
knockout.
Expect. It's not a knockout blow the way him winning Indiana.
Him winning Indiana is a knockout blow, I still think.
Right, I agree. But it doesn't look like that's going to happen.
Not at the moment, no. I mean, what the polls are now showing, do we have good polls showing her up by as much as the 9 or 10 in Indiana?
No, there are no good polls. It's that crappy PPP poll.
But in North Carolina, a couple of polls, if you track the specific polls, whether it's PPP or whatever, you've got polls that were showing him 15, 20 ahead like 10 days ago, now showing him 10
But you shouldn't even track
ahead.
The PPP poll. It's so crazy. It's
whatever.
It's 20 points up,
it's more
20
than one
points
poll
down.
in North Carolina.
I can't see any reliable polls, but Obama always underperforms his polls. So if he's ahead by 2, he's probably going to lose.
Okay, but let me update my analysis that I did last time and tell me what's wrong with it, okay? And here it is, okay? The numbers have actually, the numbers are such that when Hillary actually wins a primary with 55%, like she did last time, things actually get worse for her in a sheerly numerical sense, okay? Because like last time I did the slate calculator before Pennsylvania and went down and looked at okay, suppose she wins everything by 60, what happens? And now, after Pennsylvania, you go down and look at that, and things look even worse for her.
In terms of popular vote or delegates?
No, delegates. I mean, here's the thing I just did this morning, okay? I said, okay, assume what I still think is the worst possible in North Carolina. They split it 50-50. And suppose that every other primary, including Indiana, she wins by a blowout, 63-37, every other state remaining, including Indiana.
Right.
He is still ahead by like 70 pledged delegates.
Oh, he's going to win the
delegates. You get in Florida, and he's still ahead. And so the practical question I ask again is it seriously conceivable that the superdelegates will take the election away from a black man who leads in pledged delegates?
Not quite yet, I don't think. She has a shot.
But if what?
She has a shot. Well, she has a shot of winning the popular vote. If you count one of the 2 states, I think Michigan or Florida.
That popular vote thing is so absurd.
Why is it absurd?
I mean, well, look.
Because caucus states
the way you're calculating that popular vote is to count the number of people who showed up in a caucus in one state on par with the number who showed up in a primary in another state. Now, that's kind of silly because the way the system is supposed to work is that the state has decided that the representation of the popular will in one state, be a caucus, be a pretty small number of people, but that's been blessed as a valid representation of the popular will. In another state, they've decided that, no, it'll be a primary vote, but it's still supposed to be, in some sense, a representation of the will of the party writ large in that state. And so it's crazy to give the individuals in a caucus state the exact same value and no more as the individuals who show up to vote in a primary state.
But you're right. But the other way isn't perfect either because primaries are inherently more democratic than caucuses. So
well, no, look, I mean none of this is purely democratic in a certain sense, and they leave it to each state to decide what formula they will use to express the popular will. And so there's only one thing it makes sense to count, and that's delegates, because that is the decision they've made. They've each come up with a formula.
But the decision they've made is also that there are these super delegates, and you have to get a majority, and he's not going to get a majority. So the rules are the rules. I agree.
Well, but that's at least an explicit part of the rules is the super delegates.
Anyway, you asked what it would take for her to win, and I think it takes a bigger Obama collapse than the Reverend Wright has been able to inflict.
Okay, but you agree with me that this popular vote stuff makes no sense.
Well, it makes no sense. It's a factor, but my bigger worry is not that Obama will lose to McCain, not that he's going to lose the nomination.
Well, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it.
And after that, my fear is that he'll be a president, and we'll all hate him after a year, the way they hate Deval Patrick in Massachusetts.
You're getting way ahead of the game here.
I have the nation's interests at heart, Bob.
But specifically, my question is, given what I outlined, suppose he's ahead by at least dozens of superdelegates, which is just, again, if she wins everything but North Carolina by 63-37, and they give her Florida, he's still ahead in pledged delegates. So my question is, what would have to have happened to him to get superdelegates to nonetheless give it to her? Specifically, what kinds of things? I mean, I don't think it's...
some big scandal, and this is a segue to my little scandal that I was pushing, completely ignored by the press, the LA Times ping pong scandal. It's very similar to the Hillary cattle futures scandal with a couple of differences. In both cases, young politicians starting out needs money. A benefactor comes along. In Hillary's case, she got advice on all these cattle future trades. In Obama's case, this ping pong entrepreneur took him onto the payroll when he didn't have legal work, paid him like some $80,000, some large sum of money.
Wait, when he didn't what? When he didn't what?
Didn't have legal work. His law firm had no work.
Okay,
but no money.
But so far as we know, Obama did do work for him in exchange for the pay he got, right? I mean, we don't know
whether the work was worth the pay, but we do know that he did some work, and
that seems important, though.
In other words, it's important, but when you're unemployed, tossing you a little work and paying you a whole lot for it is a huge favor.
Not sure he's quite unemployed. He's getting a salary as a state senator, but anyway.
Anyway, so what's different from the Hillary case is that here there was a quid pro quo. Obama then did a favor for this guy, writing a letter letting him get some government grant to promote his ping pong tournament, and sort of even smellier, he had an aide who helped the guy get the grant while being paid half by Obama and half by the entrepreneur. So, this practice may be common in state legislatures, but it smells in a way that, we don't know what Hillary did in exchange for her cattle futures. So the quid pro quo is clear. The difference is the quid pro quo here is pretty harmless. I mean, the Clintons were accused of ignoring the S&L crisis, a big deal. This guy gave government money to promote a ping pong tournament.
Not only that, but
arguably not a terrible thing.
But do you know how big the grant was that he got? I mean, Obama wrote him a letter on, like, state senators stationery.
30, 40, 50,000, but it added
not
up.
Even. No. He got 20,000 was the size of the grant.
One year, but over a series of years, it added up to a couple 100,000.
Well, technically, those were separate grants, and Obama did not weigh in on those.
I'm sure the voters will appreciate these technicalities.
Well, whatever. The other, I mean, okay, so what's the deal with the cattle futures? What... She got advice and in exchange did somebody a favor? I don't remember the details.
No, she didn't get advice. Her husband is the up-and-coming attorney general, and all of a sudden people want to invest in this couple of the Clintons. Now, she was the problem with her cattle futures trading is that it looked like somebody was covering her losses. In other words, Jim Glassman wrote a piece. She traded as if some rich guy had said, "Don't worry, Hillary, if you blow it, I'll cover your losses." So you only have upside on this. In this.
But did he cover them?
Well, no, I think she. The answer is I don't know. But this is just an allegation. This has never been proved. But
well, that doesn't sound like much.
That's what it's suspicious of. Well, this guy then did her a big favor, and he was on all sorts of boards. And the question is,
but did her what big favor if we don't know that he covered her losses?
Well, no, just saying I will cover your losses is a huge favor, even if you don't.
But
have to
you just
cover
said
them.
We don't know he said that.
We don't know. I'm saying what the charge
well, this is
is.
just. I'm just insisting on fairly strict standards for accusation.
I'm saying what the charge is.
Okay, but it doesn't sound too bad so far. If all it is people making up things that might have happened.
I'm not making up things. She traded like somebody whose downside was being covered. The whole thing smelled. It was suspicious. You don't just go to the commodity business and make $100,000 in like 2 weeks.
There must be more to this than that. I'll Google it later. But the Clinton scandal I thought of in trying to put Ping Pong Gate in context was actually Whitewater. Not what Whitewater morphed into. Under the misguided guidance of Kenneth Starr, but the original alleged crime, which in the end nobody thought really amounted to much. And actually, in a certain sense, this is. More innocuous than that, or at least not demonstrably as kind of dubious, because in that case there was a quid and a quo. The quid being what was undeniably an implicit subsidy to the Clintons. Somebody went into business with him 50-50, absorbed more than his share of the losses. There was no reason for him to do that. That was like him giving them money. And that's that. It wasn't ostensibly in exchange for anything, with a possible exception of a favor that the Clinton administration did them, and that's what would have been illicit.
And what's the favor?
In Obama's case,
what was the quo? What was the quo?
Oh, this guy had a favorable regulatory decision come down later.
Right. Okay.
But anyway, in Obama's case, in both cases, there's the quo. In the Obama case and the Clinton case.
Right.
But in Obama's case, the quid only clearly exists if we know that Obama was not really doing enough work to justify this retainer, and we don't know that.
Well, right, but we're voters, Bob. We make decisions in a situation of uncertainty, and one is suspicious that Obama did not do $80,000 of work for his $80,000. That it was a bit of a favor.
It might hurt him politically. I'm just saying if I were a prosecutor or on a jury, this distinction would be very important to me.
Oh, right. I don't think it's a prosecutable crime. I just think it's clearly a conflict of interest that wouldn't be tolerated at the federal level that is tolerated at state levels all the time. There's also a money laundering issue, which is the firm sluiced this money directly to Obama, but it was technically paid to the firm, and I don't know if that's kosher. Maybe it's kosher. Maybe it happens all the time.
If you looked at the piece, it said that they did comply with reporting requirements. In other words, there was no obligation to separately report it out on Obama's disclosure requirements were apparently met.
Yeah. Okay.
But it's funny that in both of these cases, the original Whitewater and this, you kind of go, why did they do something that kind of looks this shady? And you just remember that when people are this age and they're struggling to pay the rent or whatever, they don't know they're going to be president someday. All they know is they're struggling to pay the rent.
Obama did know he was going to be president. When he was running around Harvard Law School, people would point to him and say, that's going to be the first black president. So,
well, it's easy. People say that about a lot of people. They said it about Bill Bradley, but Bill Clinton, when he was shaking hands with John Kennedy, when he was a teenager, was thinking, someday I want to be here. But the fact is...
that's my point. Everybody you're saying they don't know they're going to be president, and I'm saying they all think they are going to be president. That's the way they are.
Then they are nuts to have done these things, I guess.
Well, no, it never looks smelly when you're on the inside. There's this nice Mr. Blackwell, and he's,
But is it just me? I would, in both of those cases, I would have thought, this is ethically a little shady. Wouldn't you?
Yes, I think. Although it's very, it's...
I mean, I would have at least thought, this will look shady to someone if they see it, right?
Yes. But, like I say, when you're in the inside, it's never quite as shady as it looks like from the outside.
So we should run for office, Mickey. If we were running, this thing would be a much more high-level discourse, this whole campaign, because we would not be dragged down into the gutter.
Obama's discourse is completely high-level. That's the problem.
Too high-level for you.
This was a very high-level press conference he gave.
Well, Clinton's is too. Again, she said, I regret the efforts by the Republicans to politicize this matter. I think that's commendable.
I agree. It's almost common cause-like.
Yeah.
It's almost blogging heads in its purity.
So, what else? I don't know. This is turning out, I gotta say, it's turning out to be much more interesting. Some of the commenters are complaining that we're running so much like horse race analysis on blogging heads, and I'm not even especially a horse race politics fan, but I gotta admit, I'm enthralled.
Well, that's the problem. But once you get the bit between your teeth, sorry for that analogy, but once you're like it's Pundit City today. You're doing odds and in trade, and it's. I feel like I'm talking to Charlie Cook. I have one point from last week.
Yeah?
You challenged me to come up with you said all presidents are condescending.
Oh man, I forgot to respond to your challenge too. I'm going to look bad, but go ahead.
And first, I don't think Harry Truman was condescending. He famously drove to somebody else's inauguration from Missouri himself in his modest family sedan. And I don't know if
that was reverse snobbery.
No,
but go
I
ahead.
Think that's who. And the second thing, maybe it's possible. And the second thing is, I don't think if you read John Alter's book, even the patrician Franklin Roosevelt wasn't condescending, because his whole formative experience was doing these sort of camps for polio victims, where he sort of figured out how to lift their spirits even if he didn't cure their polio. And he himself was a polio victim, so he was in the same condition as the people he was helping. And with the difference between FDR and Obama, with FDR, it's never... With Obama, he says, the white voters, they are angry, and I have plans to help them. It shouldn't be them, it should be us. And with FDR, it was always us. It wasn't a them. And that's a distinction between Obama and FDR, and I don't think you can even say FDR.
What, you think he should say I'm going to help us white voters? You think Obama should say that?
No, he shouldn't parse that. He should say, I'm going to help Americans. Americans are hurting. That's the language.
Because I think it would hurt his credibility if he said, I'm going to help us whites.
Well, he's half white.
Okay, it would only half hurt his credibility then. You win that exchange.
But
speaking of John Alter, though, he wants to dialogue with you on Blogging Heads, Mickey.
That'd be great. I'd love to.
Okay.
He's a...
This isn't going to become like an Ezra Klein thing where you wind up backing out.
No, he's a friend of mine. I've attacked him mercilessly, but he's a friend of mine.
Well, we'll see if that holds up.
He's a tankster.
He's in the tank?
He was a tankster. He's gotten out of the tank.
He's out of the closet, you mean?
No, he's written some very critical things about Obama, very smart and critical things about Obama. He's completely out of the tank. But he was in the tank, like all those Chicago boys.
Well, he was in the tank. There is what, he's been disappointed in Obama's political performance?
I forget what it was. There was something where it was the Kling thing. He wrote a critical thing about. He wrote a perverse piece saying that the Kling was okay, but the bitter really was bad because you have to be upbeat like FDR. But it was critical of Obama, and it said it damaged him, and it was not he was applying his independent intelligence and not being in the tank.
The whole spectacle did not speak well of his political judgment, and I think it's a source of genuine concern. But I think you can divide his problem. I mean, I think everyone agrees Clinton's campaign has been outperforming and outmaneuvering Obama's lately. But I think to some extent these are like staff problems, and it has to do with the fact that, Obama, this all happened fast, I mean, Clinton by now has rejiggered the machine surrounding her a million times, and it includes all these people who were in the White House and advisors to Bill Clinton. Obama, I mean, David Axelrod is just the guy who happened to discover Obama not so long ago when he was nobody, and he's still there, and I'm sure David Axelrod's pretty good, or Obama wouldn't be where he is, but if he were great, I think there would be better responses coming out of the Obama campaign on some of this stuff.
I don't think it's a staff problem, except to the extent that somebody should have gotten to Reverend Wright and maybe gotten him not to do this publicity tour. But it's a question of,
what? Drug him? I mean, what would it take to bring that guy down? A series of tasers and then bind him and gag him?
I don't know. There are ways of getting to people. That's part of politics, There's always something. But
good luck.
This is a question of Obama's whole chosen demeanor and not getting angry and being too cool and et cetera, and not wanting to offend, being excessively sensitive to the concerns of his African American base and not realizing the extent to which he could push them and confusing the oversensitive leaders with the actual voters.
But I think you're right, Mickey. I think what American voters want is an angry black man as president. I think you're right.
Occasional flashes of anger when somebody says the U.S. government might have sponsored the AIDS virus, I think would be appreciated. Yes.
Well, there was the equivalent of. I mean, you should watch. I'll tell you seriously. You should watch the part of his press conference today beyond the prepared remarks. Maybe anger isn't quite the word, but he's seriously pissed off. And it comes through.
Okay. We're going on and on.
We're going on and on.
I thought we were going to talk about your human rights stance.
Yeah, we have to, I'm afraid, because we put it off too long. Wonderment, the commenter known as Wonderment, was disappointed to hear that I don't think human rights should play a super prominent role in our foreign policy, I guess, if I've got that right. So I need to maybe clarify what I mean and defend it.
Yes, go ahead.
Well, I guess there's two kinds of ways you can make human rights. I mean, I do think our foreign policy should ultimately serve human rights. And in fact, I maintain that my approach would serve them, at least in the long run, more effectively than an ostensible focus on them in the short run. But there's two ways you can serve the government's policy could focus on human rights. One is the sheerly rhetorical, to do jawboning when and complain that Saudi women aren't allowed to drive or whatever, or they're political prisoners. And then the other is to exact, actually costly punishments. They usually are costly to us, as a matter of fact, although that's not the big problem with them, I think, such as economic sanctions, right?
Right.
So if you take those one at a time, I think sheerly rhetorical stuff is fine when it works. I think it often has the opposite effect, especially in the current political environment. I mean, I have heard a number of Arab human rights activists say, whatever you do, don't get the Bush administration to say nice things about us. It's the kiss of death. Now, that's to some extent a property of the Bush administration. But I do think, I was in Saudi Arabia recently, and this is what occasioned this whole subject. My sense is that if you look at things like women's rights, to some extent, the fundamentalists in kind of the heartland of Saudi Arabia who would most oppose liberalization on the kind of feminism front in Saudi Arabia, they would welcome any excuse to say the West is in favor of this, especially America is in favor of this, okay? They consider that ammunition. Now, they may be wrong. I don't know. I don't know enough about the politics, but I certainly think it not infrequently happens that the fundamentalist reaction against liberalization uses, effectively, Western support for the liberalization as part of its rhetoric. So that's just a concern. And you by the way, in China right now, you see a different kind of thing, which is it's not a religious fundamentalist backlash; it's a nationalist backlash, right. Where to the extent that harsh criticism of China appears to be coming from outside of China, notably the West, it emboldens and energizes kind of reactionary Chinese nationalists.
Didn't it help free this blogger that people made us think about Saudi Arabia jailing this blogger?
I think it's interesting. first of all, this blogger was freed like a couple of days ago. I noted when I was in Saudi Arabia that this guy was in jail.
Right.
Had been in jail for several months, and we had asked various government officials about him. What's that?
That's what did it. When you denounced him, they freed him.
Yeah, it happened almost like that. No, I think what that shows... Now, it's true, actually, the U.S. had issued a statement in opposition to that detention. So, you can argue that things like that had effect. But what I would say is the first thing you can say for sure is just that there's a new transparency. I mean, 15 or 20 years ago, we would have never found out that guy was even in jail. And most people in Saudi Arabia would have never found out that guy was in jail.
Well, this is part of the grand world historical forces.
Well, I'm sorry, but the fact is modern information technologies decentralize power and make things more transparent. And I learned about his plight from a Saudi blogger. I mean, on the guy's blog, okay? I read it from America. I read about this guy being in jail. And
would you accept this as a counterexample to your argument?
Well, the point I would make is if you ask, okay, so if you accept that the Internet made the continued detention of this guy untenable from the government's point of view, which I think it did, then you have to ask, why has Saudi Arabia bought into the Internet? And I think if they want prosperity and economic engagement, well, they're a special case because their oil alone guarantees them a certain amount of prosperity, unlike, say, a North Korea, unlike almost all nations, actually. But if they want economic engagement with the modern world and a prosperity that's not totally dependent on the oil, they have to buy into the Internet. And they can try to censor it, and they do, like China. They try to. But the Internet still renders the place much more porous to information, and it makes information much harder to control within the country. So, and that's why I think, to get back to the things you can do, the sanctions you can levy in pursuit of a short-term human rights agenda, cutting off or reducing economic engagement is a perilous thing to do. I think economic engagement keeps these countries open to these ultimately liberating forces of technology in the modern technological environment. That's the argument.
Isn't there I don't disagree with you on that, but isn't there a danger that if we don't speak up about Tibet, that by the time China gets around to being liberated, Tibet will be part of China and the Tibetan culture will be wiped out?
Well, Tibet is more or less effectively part of China right now. I mean, they're running it, but...
I meant culturally and blah, 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 that will be populated with ethnic Chinese.
Yeah, although, within the last week, China has agreed to start a dialogue with people from Tibet, and maybe that's just a distraction that I'm sure that they're hoping to use that to their advantage as a way to dodge the issue, and of course the Olympics is a special kind of thing, but, and the Olympics is what did it, but at the same time, it's China's desire to engage with the world that led them to want to host the Olympics, and you see, it turned out to be associated with this kind of transparency that may have complicated their attempt to subjugate Tibet. I don't know. I mean, it certainly matters how fast will these things happen. And I've never said that they're going to happen immediately, but at the same time, people who look at China and say, nothing's changed, are just people devoid of historical memory. They're people not as old as me who don't remember China 30 years ago. There is no comparison. There is no comparison between China now and China 30 years ago. And I think there's no comparison between Saudi Arabia now and Saudi Arabia 20 years ago.
But the progress of Saudi Arabia is much
slower because they're only starting now, partly because they have the oil wealth, they're only starting now to try to engage in the global economy. That's one reason, but I personally see progress. There's one more thing I should say about my perspective, which is I happen to think that the world is in grave peril of epic chaos, something not quite maybe on par with literal apocalypse, but something very bad. This has happened repeatedly in human history. It's happened often amid great technological change, so this very technological flux poses dangers, but, that would be bad for everyone, okay?
What does your apocalypse look like?
Well, right now it looks like the specifics are, if you want to, nuts and bolts version, another big terrorist attack, especially if it seems internal. If it's American Muslims or something, America overreacts in a way that just fuels the ongoing kind of jihadist spirit. So it gets worse. It gets worse. It gets worse. Finally, nukes get involved. All bets are off. That's the way and it could be exacerbated by various. It could be exacerbated by, downturn in the economy, resource shortage. It could have a lot of factors. But the point is, I admit that I do not focus. I'm far from focusing single-mindedly on the plight of women in Saudi Arabia, even though it's important. Nor do I focus very single-mindedly on the plight of women in America or the plight of men in America, because my great fear, whether I'm right or wrong, is that we're pretty close to something that would be bad for pretty much everybody. And so that's just a bias I carry into the analysis.
Well, your apocalypse is bigger than mine.
Well, I
just wanted to get out that line.
Yeah, and and there's so many ways that I could respond that I would regret that I'll just say, why, thank you, Mickey. But so that's it. I mean, surely you can challenge this view, though. You're maybe the wrong person. I bought into your book, Bob. I'm not. Well, then Jackie Shire should challenge this view.
I think you're pretty much. You might have been suckered in the case of Saudi Arabia. As long as they have their oil wealth, I'm not convinced that they're going to make huge strides in the right direction. If we invent solar technology and everybody has cheap solar power and Saudi Arabia's out of business, then it seems to me that incorporating them in the global economy requires big changes in their society, and they'll be China-like. But
I assure you there are initiatives afoot, well, including the active government sponsorship of increased access to broadband internet and all these things, that they would not that will have the effect of engaging them with the world and decentralizing power. And these are things they would not have to do if they were planning to live on oil for the rest of their lives. That much I guarantee you. Now the initiatives may end as soon as King Abdullah dies or whatever, but and I may be wrong about their impact, and they may unfold much more slowly than I think, but it is definitely not the case. This is not North Korea. They are not in a hunker down mentality right now, the government.
Okay, well, go fight Jackie Shire.
No, she should.
I'm a Bob Wrightian.
Yeah.
So.
Well, she should come on. I should argue with her about it.
Well, you can argue with her, and I'll argue with John Alter. How about that?
We could do that. We'll take a week off where.
Maybe we should.
Bob and Mickey, it'll be like, tag team wrestling or something.
It'll be
but
like
not exactly.
It'll be like interleague play in baseball. How about that? So
we will vanquish our foes and then return to battle one another.
Something like that. Do we have anything else to talk about?
I don't think so. This would set a recent record for. I have a question, though. Our commenter, Hans Gruber,
yeah,
in the comment section has a reference to Obama's crotch clutching during the anthem. Is that something you know about?
No.
Okay, so this must be mere hearsay.
I have a vague memory of hearing some reference to that, but I have not seen it.
The aforementioned Wonderment mounted a fascinating post called "In Defense of the Weather Underground," which was not as crazy as it first seemed, and prompted the commenter Publius to write, "This is an excellent and informative conversation," after which he was reprimanded by Graz, who said, "Careful, you might be branded as elitist." But it actually was a surprisingly interesting moral dialogue.
What was the defense of the Weather Underground?
Well, I could actually read a little bit of it, okay, first of all, well, he says, Ayers makes the claim that the use of violence, particularly with the aim of zero loss of life, was the idea, does Ayers say that the bombs were supposed to kill people or just shake people up?
I don't know.
Okay, so Anyway, especially with the loss of aim of zero loss of life, was justified as a form of protest and pressure to end the Vietnam and Cambodian War. If you look at the crimes of the Johnson and Nixon administrations in their historical context, napalming civilians, Agent Orange, torture, starvation, mass murder, carpet bombings, persecution of dissidents in the U.S., I will not go on. There is a case to be made that taking up arms against such a regime is justified. Now, you may argue that the prospects of achieving success in ending the war through revolutionary violence were slim to none. I agree. But to call Ayers a terrorist and throw him in the Osama bin Laden pile is a reach for the moral high ground by the very people and political establishment that secretly carpet-bombed Cambodia, murdering hundreds of... I think I misread that sentence. Anyway, you get the idea. Of course, it's a slippery slope if you buy that kind of logic because... I mean, Osama bin Laden does think of his mission in those terms, as ultimately justified as serving the greater good.
I think the weather...
although maybe not in strictly utilitarian terms, I don't know.
I think the Weathermen did wind up after Ayers, after Ayers, they did wind up taking life. But I agree, the dirty little secret of the anti-war movement is that the war was ended, that the violence actually helped end the war, because people thought the society was spinning out of control, and they didn't think it was worth it. I didn't participate in it, but I acknowledge that it helped end the war.
So you have affection for terrorists?
No, I just think breaking the windows at the IBM building or wherever, helped. That I didn't do it, and I'm against it, but I can't deny that it had the effect of people saying, "Wait, our sons and daughters are going out of control. This is ridiculous."
So you celebrate terrorism?
That's it, Bob.
But you are saying that this terrorism on balance saved American lives, right? And you celebrate it.
I don't celebrate it.
And you have affection for the terrorists.
I don't celebrate it because I think you have to practice the society that you want to become. But I do think I do think violence and craziness in the 60s helped end the war.
And saved lives on balance.
It depends what... I don't know about saved lives on balance, but...
Okay, well, why don't we just end on this note of you celebrating terrorism?
I condemn and reject you. And disown you. And denounce you.
You not only denounce me, you renounce me.
This isn't the Bob Wright that I thought I knew.
This is not the Reverend Wright that needs to be most denounced right now, but it's the best you can do.
I denounce all rights.
And renounce.
Okay.
Okay.
See you maybe next week, maybe not.
Maybe we'll be doing tag team wrestling next week. We don't know.
Okay.
Okay.
See ya.